Hi, I'm David with EV World News. We're talking about electric vehicles, energy, and the stock markets. I'm joined today by engineer Mike Herzog. How's it going, Mike?
Great to be here again, David.
Well, this is going to be something different today. So, folks, we're going to talk a little bit about how EV charging and the grid interface. And this came from a presentation you had to do to the city of Omaha, correct?
Yeah, I've done this with the city. I did this at a full 8-hour seminar class not that long ago. So if you're interested in this, we can get you some info. I'll be giving that again probably in October, November of this year, trying to set out a time. But I'm dragging you into my world today, David. It's going to get a little graphy. It's going to get a little mathy. We're going to see, but hopefully it gives maybe a little bit better perspective where I'm coming from the grid side and how EVs impact that.
Well, you know, we get a lot of people who like the engineering perspective on a lot of different things. And it's funny because sometimes after I've had you on the show, I'll get people arguing about how wrong you are about stuff. And I'm just like, you really don't realize it. He's not just some random guy off the street, you know, that we have on here, you know, to talk about EVs. I'm probably the random guy off the street. Okay. You know, but when, you know, it's like when somebody like disagrees with Bill, you know, it's like, you know, Bill's been doing this for not just the 26 years of EV world. He was doing it for like 10 years before that. He can date back into you know, almost to like 1990 when he first started getting into this stuff. I mean, he's been at this a long time. I mean, I've just been kind of shocked at how far.
That all the time. It's like I happen to know the guy who's owned evworld.com since 1998.
Yeah.
It was like, wow, like he's really been engaged in this space and done a great service. I think done a great service for EVs during all of that time.
I can't believe how much time he devotes to this. But anyways, let's get into your presentation. Let me pull up your slide deck.
Yeah, and it'll be a little different format. One thing I try to cite everything as I go through, some of its opinion. But my opinion is I have almost 20 years of experience in electric grid planning. I'm a professionally licensed engineer across multiple states. This is what I do. This is what I look at. So it's really trying to jump into this space and do some explanations around what matters from the grid. And people ask me the question, hey, are you worried about EVs? Are you worried about this space? Whatever might be happening there? And it's like the short answer, yes, the grid is a little bit concerned. There are some things we need to pay attention to. There are some things that are an area of concern or cause for concern as we look at it. So this is kind of that high level overview. It will get a little technical in spots, but I'm gonna try to stay out of those weeds where I can. Like I said, I've got a lot more that gets into those technical weeds. This is really meant to be centered on. Looks like I lost my slides. Oh, there we go. That looks good. But this is meant to be centered on that accessible perspective on it. But I do have it from more of a utility-centric planning space. Like this is what you really need to be concerned about. So first of all, when we talk about EVs, I like to break it into these categories. So they're kind of spaced out in here. You got what's on top is what's important to a utility, what's important to a grid. What's on the bottom is kind of the parallel to you as an EV driver, how that kind of fits together and what you're going to be interested in. So all of these EVs, this is a great site. It's sponsored by Department of Energy and the government. It gives all these specs for every EV model that's out there. You can get all this information. This is the sticker. This is what's the sticker on an EV and what you should be interested in. So battery capacity, number one. And I'm going to talk in the units for this. It's kilowatt hours, critical to utility. That's how we measure energy that goes through. Typically 10 is going to be smaller. It's going to be more of your plug-in hybrid type option. 200 kilowatts is going to be a big honking battery in a large EV, but
like a Hummer. Like a Hummer, or what is it, the Silverado? They both have that 205.
Yeah. The other piece that's important from that we look at from a utility standpoint is it's instantaneous power draw that we're going to measure in kilowatts. So this is really going to be based on, are you level 1 charging, level 2 charging, DC fast charging, how it is. These are just some typical numbers that might go in there, but we'll spell out a little bit later. The parallel to that is what you care about as a consumer. Like, well, I don't, kilowatt hours doesn't come up in my life. Well, that translates into the bottom left there, miles traveled. Like how far can you go on a charge? Typical all electric range, 20 to 350 miles, somewhere in there. No, and that's, everybody will have an opinion of what's the right number. What does that look? This is just a high level range. That's okay. And then what you really care about in what the rub or the drawback is on a lot of these EVs in this space is how fast can you charge? So I care about the top right, which is how much that power draw is. You care about the bottom right, which is how many miles are you adding in that short amount of time, but that translates
Right.
into that power space. This is kind of just a high level what we look at when we would consider what does an actual EV matter, because we're going to get into the actual modeling and impact of the grid and what happens in those spaces. So you and I have talked about this car a lot.
Okay.
I like it. I think it's a sharp looking vehicle. I think it's going to do really well in the space, but it's the Kia EV6. I think this is just a nice example vehicle to talk about. Price tag's not too bad. It's got DC fast charging. The 2024 model is actually going to have the 800 volt DC.
Nice.
Super speed, which we've talked about a lot before.
Mm-hmm.
Might not have a place to do that yet, but it's going to be equipped for it. 250 mile range. It's a nice vehicle. I like it. But what I care about that is these specs. So going back to that previous one, hey, its battery capacity is 77 kilowatt hours, and its charging rate kind of instantaneously at level 1, you can get about 1.2 kilowatts of demand. Level 2, it's about 11 kilowatts of demand, and then the DC fast charging is 200 kilowatts of demand. So we're kind of going to use this as you bought this, you take it home to your garage, your neighbor bought it, they took it home to their garage. What does this actually do to the grid? Like why do these numbers matter, and why are we concerned about some of these things from a grid planning perspective?
Okay.
So here we go. This is where it gets mathy. We're not going to spend a lot of time on here, but if you actually start to crunch these numbers and look at it, I'm not going to do the extreme cases. Everybody likes to look at the extremes. You have to go from 0% full to 100% full. And how long does that take? And what does it look like? But we're looking at it from an average perspective. What do the average looks like? So according to Kelley Blue Book, about the average US driver could drive about 40 miles per day. That's across all industries. That's across all spaces. It's just a number pulled off from Kelley. So you can math that out a little bit, figure out your battery capacity, and translate that back into a kilowatt hours number. So we think about it, I need to recharge 40 miles per day. But the reality is, out of that 77 kilowatt hour battery storage capacity, I need to restore about 12.1 kilowatt hours every day out of that.
Now, most of our haters, they are in a situation where they have to tow 8,000 pounds, 200 miles each direction to work each day. And, so.
Uphill both ways, right?
Right, uphill both ways, up the mountain. And then down and back up the mountain again on the way home.
Yep, exactly. So it's just a quick, if you're going to charge level 1 home charging, it's going to take you about 10 hours. Profile, you're going to be drawing 1.2 kilowatt hours for 10 hours. That's kind of shown on the graph over there. If you're going to be level 2 charging, that drops down to a little more than 1 hour, but you're drawing 11 kilowatt hours. So if you're in the market for an EV, if you're looking at it, you can see why getting that level 2 charger installed in your garage is important. just from a daily driving perspective, yeah, I suppose you can make it over 10 hours, but it's much better to get, I'd rather that thing charge up in an hour. That 1 hour is very important. That's not a lot of active charging time when you really think about it. And I'll explain a little bit more why that's very important as we start to get into more of the details. So why are we concerned? Just at a high level, why, as an electric utility, I'm speaking broadly for everybody. What do EVs represent? Well, an average US home, any given hour during the year, is going to draw about 1.2 kilowatts of power. That's an EIA, Energy Information Administration government-sponsored project. They look at all of it, average house, any time during the year, regardless of your climate, 1.2 kilowatts of power. However, during high demand periods, your AC is running, your lights are on, your stove's on, your dryer's on, washer's on, all of those things, mainly driven by AC. Houses across the nation will pull about 7 to 15 kilowatts instantaneous demand. Why are we concerned about that? Our little friend, the EV6 here, if you have an appropriately sized level 2 charger in your garage, it draws 11 kilowatts of power instantaneously. So you just doubled the size of your house in the same footprint effectively.
Right.
Big implications, if you have an older home, the size of your panels, your circuits, everything like that. But all of that starts to snowball upstream into different parts of the grid. So it's, hey, we had built this system. It's really had the same construction standards, same sizing, a lot of it since the big AC boom. That was the last major change we saw in the 60s and 70s. Hey, the size of demand of housing went way up because we added ACs from where it was. We need to design the grid differently. Well, we're at a new point where it's like, whoa, 2-car home, 2-garage home. You park 2 of these things that are drawing that level of power, you've like tripled your demand of an individual home. So it's just different draw on the grid.
So if we're drawing 11 kilowatts of power, does that translate to putting 11 kilowatt hours into the battery each hour?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Yep,
So that
exactly.
would effectively be adding about 30 miles of range probably per hour. Okay.
Yep. You got it. But it's this 11 where it's the instantaneous, like your wires are only so big.
Or 30 to 40, 30 to 40,
Yeah.
30 to 35 anyways.
Wires are so, and that's true of all the system. Like most systems aren't overbuilt. I mean, they're right sized. Utilities, a lot of them are private businesses who have margins and who have shareholders and stakeholders who want to make profit. Like, you don't gold plate a system. You don't put in a wire twice as big as you need to. You put it in the right size. Well, it was right size for this home. Now that home has doubled. So we need to be a little bit concerned about it. Level 1 charging in your home isn't as much of a concern. Even when we look at it from charging station perspective, these are all stats from energy.gov. Less than 1% of public charging is level 1, which makes a lot of sense, because
right.
Who's going to be in a parking spot for 10 hours to get 30 miles or 40 miles out of it? It draws about, on average, 1.9 kilowatts, and it's just a standard outlet. And just for reference on that, a hairdryer uses about 1.5 kilowatts, and a typical vacuum uses 1.1. So you're plugging in a hairdryer, you're plugging in a vacuum to your garage. Most homes are able to handle that. It's a small fraction of the home's overall load. It's not going to contribute. Now, if every single house and every single vehicle all of a sudden changed to electric, yeah, we would be concerned about that. Like that.
Well, I mean, you're still limited to 110 volt power, right?
Yep.
So regardless of what's plugged into that wall thing, the car can't pull more than that 1.9 kilowatts, right?
Exactly. You've got a ceiling. I mean, it's an older home, a very older home that has an undersized panel. Yeah, maybe you're going to be concerned about this older wiring, but
ball and tube.
Yeah. A scaled up grid perspective, like, well, we can handle a whole bunch of hair dryers, we can handle a whole bunch of vacuums. Now, if we got 300 million of them, now that might be a different story. But
right.
From as we have, I should say it in this frame, we have time to react to this. We have time to react if everybody would go around this perspective. From the commercial standpoint, and I like this one. So we have an example of this. We've got a local grocery store here in Nebraska, chain Hy-Vee. They've done some work with Tesla to put some supercharging stations in their parking lots. They've coupled together a lot. I think it's a good deal. They're close to the interstate. They've done a good job planning now. Well, typically these grocery stores, you can think Walmart, like a Walmart super center is a good reference for what this looks like. It's about 150,000 square feet. Peak demand, it's going to be about somewhere between 750 kilowatts and 1,000 kilowatts. That same amount of demand at 1,000 kilowatts, if you just go by the numbers, just go by the nameplate numbers, is the same as about 4 Tesla supercharging stations plugs, and they take up a significantly smaller amount of footprint. So this is actuals. This is what it looks like. So from a grid planning perspective, you've got this big old honking grocery store, Walmart supercenter, whatever you want to call it, drawing about 1,000 kilowatts. Then tucked into the corner over here, you have a Tesla supercharging station that can draw that much power as well.
If it has the cars there.
Exactly. If the cars are there, if there's no active management, I think Tesla actually does a pretty good job about understanding that and kind of controlling how their total demand works and how all those things fit together. But If you're just looking at this literally from the top down, this much space for a couple of cars parking equals the same amount as a grocery store. And
I know it's considered bad taste to back up to the other side of the charger and take the other plug if there's other ones you can go to. Because for some reason the cars charge slower. The further you are apart at the Tesla superchargers, the faster your car charges.
Really?
Yeah, it's I don't get that part, but
I don't know. They have to be doing some type of active management. I think they have to. Otherwise uncontrolled. But this grocery store has been there for 25 years. This parking lot, it's had the same density, it's had the same low density from a grid planning standpoint forever. And like from what our model looked like 5 or 10 years ago, well, if I want to add this same amount of demand, like I have to build a giant honking building right there. I have time to react. This thing went up in a couple of months and created the same grid demand that anything else would. So when we look at it from that perspective, like why are we worried as grid plant? That took up just a fraction of space and has this huge amount of demand that goes into it compared to a grocery store. Where this, like the rubber really hits the road, no pun intended there, is this concept called peak demand across a utility. And basically it is when everything is happening at once. It's the biggest stress the grid can see. So we have planned our entire system from our generation sources to transmitting across states in the bulk electric system down to the regional distribution where the wire actually gets to your house, actually gets to your grocery stores, all planned around this peak demand period. And it's an hour. It's a very specific hour throughout the year when the grid is at its highest. Typically, that's going to be in the summer, and we'll talk about that here in a second, driven by AC. And heat. And then in other areas where there's high prevalence of electric heat, it can occur in the winter as well, winter mornings when those things would come up. But we've effectively built our entire system around this hour. We project, we do economic analysis. How much is the region going to grow? How much load can we expect to add? All of these different components that are going in, and we plan our system around this hour. Well, when is that hour? Peak occurs between 4 and 6 p.m. normally on the hottest day of the year, and it's kind of this magical little space where the grid demand is at its highest. Now, a bunch of things contribute to that. One, the bottom bullet point is probably the most important. It's the hottest part of the day. So where you have normal lack of coincidence between ACs running. So like you and I are neighbors. It's not a super hot day. My AC will run for 15 minutes, be idle for an hour. Your AC will run for 15 minutes, be idle for an hour. Your neighbor's going to do that. My neighbor's going to do that. The chances of those overlapping aren't very high. And when you extrapolate that out to 1 million people in a city, the chances of everybody's running at the exact same time isn't very high. You have natural coincidence occurring or lack of coincidence. As it gets hotter and hotter and hotter, and normally peak occurs on about the third day, where it's been 100 degrees multiple days in a row, or if you're in Phoenix, it's been 120 degrees for the past 2 months. But it's your ACs can't keep up, so everybody's ACs are running constantly. It builds towards that. But why it occurs in kind of this magic period here is you have some people coming home and you have some people at the office still. So I'm in an office right now. The lights are still on. People are running printers. People are running computers. So you have this high office load. It's still climate controlled. All these things are happening. And then people get home. And what do you do when you get home? Well, I turn on the lights. If it's the hottest day of the year, I go, damn, it's hot in here. And I crank down my AC a couple of notches and ask that to run. I start a load of laundry. I start cooking dinner. I turn on the TV. I turn on the stereo. I do all of these things at once, and it coincides right with the traditional rush hour. Your 9 to 5s, people come home right at about the same time, and this coincidence of all of these people doing these things all at once contributes to this huge spike of demand on the grid. Well, why are we worried about that with electric vehicles? Because what else are you going to do when you get home if you drive an electric vehicle? I'm going to plug it in when I get home. Right now, 80% of EV charging is done at home. From research and actual numbers from a lot of areas, people tend to plug in when they get home. Now it's, our maybe our best example is like a cell phone. Yeah, some people let their cell phones ride. Some people they're like, I'm gonna drain it down to zero, charge it whenever I can. Other people, I walk in the door, first thing I do, I plug my cell phone in. I'm done. It's gonna charge for the day. I don't have to worry about it. Everything like that. But from a grid perspective, plugging in your car and letting it start to charge when you get home at 4, 5, 6 o'clock, whenever it is the absolute worst time. So you're taking a already stressed grid and you're adding this electric vehicle load to it if there's absolutely no control associated. So from a grid planning perspective, we're very worried about it.
Now, where we live in Nebraska,
oh, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, where we live in Nebraska, there's no price change through the day on electricity. If you go to Nevada, EV people, some of them say they're charging for free at night. And in California, there's a huge difference in price after 11 o'clock. Yep. And a lot of that's due to the fact they have all that wind energy available. But, so some states have alleviated that through, changing the pricing on electric. But where we're at, the EVs aren't the huge problem yet. But we're starting to see every month you're seeing more and more on the road. I'm starting to notice a lot more here in Nebraska than I used to.
It's popping up for sure. And there are other, you'd call them like human habit controls, where it's I come home, I do this, and it's disincentivizing. Like, well, if you can do your laundry at 10 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night after the sun goes down or the wind picks up, instead of 3 o'clock in the afternoon when it's the hottest part of the day, do that. And they do the time of use rates for that. It's like, well, it's going to cost you $3 to do your laundry if you have to do it at 3 o'clock today, or you can wait till 8 o'clock and it's going to cost you 25 cents. And in some cases, in some communities and utility districts and areas, like it's that big of a discrepancy. I mean, it's 4 or 5 times the cost of what you might be doing. So you can look at the load profile, the yellow line on that graph. I mean, it looks like that. It's like a cyclical sinusoid where it comes up as it gets hotter and hotter during the day. That coincidence between ACs increases and the load goes up. There's a little spike there at the end, and I over exaggerated it on this, but that's kind of that period when everybody's home. It's 9 or 10 o'clock at night. You're home, you're starting that overnight load of laundry, you're putting all that stuff together. It's just how all that stuff kind of fits together. You turn on the TV, you're not out and about. People kind of settle in at that point. Why we worry about this from the electric utility standpoint too, where we start to see this, not just from the grid standpoint, but you put this in your garage, you start charging at 5 o'clock at night when the grid is at the most stress. You have an office commercial park where you want to put in a charging station out there. We have to connect every customer. There's a piece of metal, there's a wire running from every source that has a unique and this direct path or distinct path to every customer. While you go through a neighborhood like that, you got green boxes in your backyard, you got poles in your backyard, anywhere like that. But it runs through the entire neighborhood. You have these large loops that go through and kind of go into that economic model. They're not big. They're sized for what that neighborhood is and how it looks like. The issue we see if you look at that top residential neighborhood, well, if somebody in the middle of that line buys an EV and then their neighbor buys an EV and you get that clustering effect and all of a sudden that line becomes overloaded, we have to replace the entire thing. And this is my neighborhood. This is where I live. It's established. There are pools, there are trees, there is landscaping, there are patios, and it's all underground. And if we have to come in and replace that entire loop, we are digging up everyone's backyard. It's
wow.
A major issue. So just aside, we think about it from a grid perspective of, well, what if the wind doesn't blow? What if the sun doesn't shine? Or we get rid of coal? From the utility perspective, we look at it, I don't want to go and dig up every neighborhood. Just the cost alone, but the PR associated with something like that. Same with the commercial loop on the bottom. Boy, you want to put your parking station somewhere in that red line, you're busting concrete. You're tearing up parking lots. Now, in some places it'll be in conduit and you can pull a wire in and pull one out and pull a new one in. But just in general, it's a pain in the butt, and it's expensive, and nobody's going to be happy with it. So there's direct incentive, there's direct push to make sure that that doesn't happen. So when we talk about charge control, which is exactly what you were just talking about before, of can we move this over? What we're really attempting to do is, if we, the one on the left, if we just left it alone and let people do what they wanted, charge when you want, go through in a space like that, it's going to make our peak worse. It's going to overload facilities. We're going to have to replace facilities. We're going to have to add generation. We're going to have to do all of those. Well, what if we could shift that to overnight? And effectively, you take that same charging profile from our Kia EV6 and do it in the middle of the night. You didn't stress facilities. You filled in the valleys rather than adding to the peak. And why can we do this? And this is probably the most important part of it. All four of those things on top are unique steps. We tend to think of EV being plugged in and EV starts charging as one event. And then EV being unplugged means EV stop charging is another event. Well, they're four separate things. They're actually four very unique and separate things. So typically, you'll plug in your EV when you get home between 3 and 7, somewhere in there. You'll unplug it in the morning when you leave, 6 and 9 p.m. Well, what we saw before, the Kia EV6 on daily use, it's only charging for an hour or two. So you are plugged in for 10 to 12 hours, but you're only actively charging for 1 to 2 hours to get yourself with a full tank.
Right.
By default, that happens right when you plug it in, unless you have it set. Now, a lot of cars can set that. A lot of chargers can set that. There's different programs, but effectively, like if you just let people come and plug in and starts charging, it happened at the absolute worst time during the day, and it's done in an hour. And then it just sits there overnight and does nothing after that in that space.
We had somebody on the show about a year ago that was with Emporia Energy, and they make this home energy management system that essentially it plugs into your breaker box, and then it's monitored by an app, and then it would set it so that your car would only charge, it would turn on that circuit for the car between 11 till it's charged up, and then but it would monitor other things too, like and this was in the case of, say, California, where the energy price goes up at 4 p.m. So what it would do is it would cool off your home from 2 to 4. And then your air conditioner would shut off for a couple of hours during that time span and then come back on just as needed. But it would basically keep it from being on during the expensive time of the day, which doesn't affect us here in Nebraska, but still, we've looked at some different things, but it was really quite amazing because it also would find where you had circuits that you didn't even know you were using power, and it would teach you to go and shut those off. And, he was saying that typically people who installed the system cut their power by 10 to 20%, their usage, simply because they didn't know that some of these circuits were using the power that they didn't know what was going on. Obviously, you're not going to be shutting off your deep freeze. You're not going to be shutting off your, things like that.
Your critical loads.
But it helped manage all those features that you've been talking about, in a meaningful
cool.
time zone.
And that's you're getting to the punchline, which is great, which is there are tools out there today that do this, that people have been planning for this, and what we've kind of been proving out in the industry in some of these spaces is like, yeah, you can do it. You don't, on a typical day, you don't drain your battery to zero and have to charge for 12 hours in a row. Effectively, like you could charge your car 2 or 3 times in the span that you have it plugged in, and move all of that load around. And that's important when we talk about it from the bigger grid perspective. Like, well, we tell everybody not to charge at 5 o'clock. We program them all to start at midnight. Well, did you just create a problem at midnight because everybody's cars turned on? Like, we don't need to do that. Some of them can start at 10 and charge for an hour or two. The next batch of them can start at midnight and charge for an hour or two. The next batch can start at 2 and charge for an hour or two. And you can do this over and over again to not create that. But it may seem straightforward and easy, but as we've actually started to play with the numbers and get these things figured out and say, yeah, you can do this. And people have it set up through either the vehicle itself, the charger in your garage, or home control that we're able to able to control these things. So that's
Does
the thing. We can do these.
Does any of your presentation address when you expect realistically vehicle to grid to come to Nebraska in a meaningful way?
I do talk about vehicle to grid and why we would use that and come up that's the next thing. So it's not specific on timing, but I'm going to finish with some vehicle to grid stuff that I think is very
okay. Okay.
So spent the last 25 minutes telling you why plugging in at 5 o'clock is the worst thing you can possibly do. Well, from a vehicle to grid perspective, having this battery capacity plugged in when your system needs it the most can actually be a really good thing for the grid. And it's the exact same concept where, what if this blue line on here is your vehicle charging demand, it's flat, it's flat, it's flat. Hey, you plugged in the afternoon, you're juicing the grid. You're providing a source back into it. So you're lowering your peak demand, which is that dashed green line. And you can effectively, well, I can do that and charge back overnight and still not raise the overall demand on everything. I can keep things lowered. And effectively, it's the same thing. Hey, well, let's go back to our Kia EV6. Per day, you use about 12 kilowatt hours on average. That leaves you with like 65 kilowatt hours in your tank, in your battery. And you can inject 11 kilowatt hours back into the grid, or 11 kilowatts of resource back into the grid. Well, you're only going to lose another hour of charging, or I should say introduce another hour of charging on the back end to it. So you can plug in, the grid can draw off your battery. It can take as much or as little as it needs. You could set a threshold, say, no, never take me below 50%, never take me below 30%. I need to have these miles. Don't mess with it that way. This is all happening passively. You're not doing anything. You just plugged your car in. The grid is managing this system for you. It starts charging again at 10 o'clock or at midnight or at 2 in the morning. You leave the next morning at 6, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. You live with a full tank, your vehicle fully charged overnight. And in the background, yeah, it's been drawing, it's been recharging, it's been doing all of this. But you as a consumer or you as an EV owner never saw any of it. Those things really never came up. The logistics of vehicle to grid are a little bit tougher. There are management systems and communications and all kinds of things that need to happen for that to be effective. Traditionally, getting behind the meter in a control space has been kind of a fuzzy area for utilities. It's like, well, we stay on this side of the meter. Everything on the other side of the meter, we don't get into. So this is not just like lightly entering in. This is no, we're getting behind the meter, and we are going to control your vehicle. We're going to actively do these things and move forward with it. There are questions about, does this void your vehicle's warranty? I mean, the short answer is yes on quite a few of them, Teslas especially. And effectively, they will say you get so many miles on this battery. And that's based off of you're cycling through the battery, you're draining it, you're charging it, you're draining it, you're charging it. That should equate to you get 50,000 miles, you get 100,000 miles on this warranty. Well, in this case, you're draining your battery, you're charging your battery, you're draining, you're charging, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and you're not adding any miles to the vehicle. You did not actually travel 20,000 miles. You just cycled your battery over and over and over again and got no actual vehicle usage out of it. Right. Changing vehicle to grids become a center point in what they call the distributed energy resource space. It's being included in a lot of areas. People are starting to move. Now you need complicated control equipment, you need customer agreements, you need a lot of logistics around it, but there's a reason we would want to do it. So this is getting 1 megawatt of resource, which is kind of a common term. Hey, we need generation. How are we going to get on our system? These numbers now, everybody's going to poke holes in these numbers. Oh my God, they're so big. Why are you hurting solar? Why are you hurting batteries in this space? I got this from EIA.gov. I mean, this is what the federal government says. Take that for what it's worth. But these are standard numbers that people have put in.
Yeah, I know what. So it's interesting. Got the 7 acres of solar for 1 megawatt. And it costs 1.5 million to do. I know if I put in 200, if I was putting in 100 megawatts, I know I can do that for much less than $1 million a megawatt,
Yep.
and we can get it down to 5 acres.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
Oh, 100%.
but
100%.
yeah, the equipment's there. But yeah, in general, this is probably accurate for the last. I'd agree with it for the last 10 years. It's just that the most cutting edge stuff now, I know where it's sitting at price wise, and what, and it's interesting because the $1 million for 1 megawatt is just, it makes for super easy math too.
Yeah, I know. There's good numbers. This is total cost. So it's not just equipment, installation, everything like that, but just illustrative with some sourced numbers. But yeah, a megawatt of solar, and there's no dispatch, which means you don't control it. Like the sun's shining where it's not. You're putting it in, and it's feeding into the grid as the sun shines. A utility scale battery, so a big honking one, a megawatt's about the size of a shipping container. Just as a point of reference, 1.8 million bucks, and then a gas peaking plant, 1 megawatt, and this is all scaled. Because you don't really put in a 1 megawatt one, you're going to put in something larger than that. You can run as much as you want. Now, this doesn't include fuel cost to actually operate the thing, but it also gives you a perspective of why solar's been so challenged and storage has been so challenged. Because you look at it as like, whoa, I can put in a gas plant for pretty dirt cheap and run it as much as I need to comparatively. Well, to get that same 1 megawatt of battery capacity, we need 91 Kias across the system. All we would need to incent is the cost of the software to operate those behind the meter, and then cost of incentives, because I'm not doing that for free. I worked at a utility for a long time, and I'm not going to do that out of the kindness of my heart as an EV owner. Like, you pay me for it.
Right.
So effectively, like for 10 years, which maybe that's the life cycle of a utility scale battery. You could pay each one of those Kia owners $1,900 a year and say, I want to use your battery as much or as often as I want to. I'm going to pay you almost $2,000 a year. You're going to be able to replace that battery after 10 years. You're going to have a hell of a down payment on a brand new car if you want that after 10 years. And it'd be more cost effective than a utility scale battery in that perspective. Now, utility's never going to pay somebody $1,900 a year, but it starts to give you those, like, you could go up to that amount and it would still be a more cost effective solution than having, putting in a shipping container somewhere out there. And it's crazy. 91's not very many.
There's a couple things though, when you're looking at some of this. So if you have the gas peaking plant, you paid 900,000 base cost per megawatt, but then you've got the cost of the fuel.
Yep.
But you also probably located that plant near where the energy is needed, right?
Yep.
Whereas when you have that 7 acres of solar, you get that 1 megawatt when it's available for that price, but you got to pay for transmission because the solar is never located where, well, I shouldn't say never. There are situations where it's right beside like a, a data center or something like that. They're sucking up massive amounts of power, but you're not putting that solar farm right in the middle of downtown Omaha.
And that's what it is. You have to plan ahead for that. Otherwise, I mean, where this capacity is most needed, you think growing areas like popular. Okay, we need to support our capacity in this.
Right.
The optimal location is right next to it. Well, that's also where land is the highest, and all of a sudden this cost goes way up because instead of paying nickels, you're paying quarters on the land that you need because it's in high demand. That's where your community is growing.
I'm not saying you're not going to pay transmission costs from the gas plant, but it's usually going to be located more conveniently because it doesn't take up as much dirt as the solar does. The solar generally has your main cost after it's put in, or your only real cost is transmission.
Yep. And that's the rub. And this isn't about, what the values of those and everything, because solar has no fuel. I mean, there's no fuel cost going forward. Natural gas, yes, you're going to pay, you're going to be paying a lot more in that space. Rooftop solar can make sense, and I'd say especially commercially, where you have large flat roofs and in spaces like that. But generally, you have economies of scale are applicable in all of these spaces as well, and that's why utility solar tends to edge out in those spaces because from a pure economic cost perspective, you have an economy of scale. You have one interconnection point for a whole lot of solar panels rather than one interconnection point for just a handful of solar panels.
There's another argument against it too, and I have rooftop solar. Okay, but rooftop solar is 4 to 4.5 times as expensive because of the margins that the solar installers put as a premium on your house, or as what these big solar farms pay. So you're for exactly the same service, but on a smaller scale, you're paying at least a minimum of 4 times what those solar farms are paying for the same amount of output. It's really, I've said this before. I'm not saying that solar itself is a scam. I think the rooftop solar on your house industry is a bit of a scam. Okay. And it's way, way overpriced.
I don't disagree with that totally. I mean, it's one of those, there are absolutely bad actors in that field as well, that go out there. But it's, the transmission costs are not as big of an issue, which is getting to another topic where it's, you're talking about interconnection queues and having to wait in line and paying huge premiums for system upgrades when you add it in bulk. Whereas if you locate these things close to the source, you're not feeding back into the grid, and you have those spaces, and you are avoiding some of those steady costs and backlogs in those areas as well. And that's not just residential rooftop solar. I mean, that could be commercial rooftop solar as well. I mean, put them on top of a Walmart, and you're avoiding a lot of that. It's consumed locally.
Yeah, I get that.
But all of this was really just to show, it's not crazy. 91 Kia EVs with the size of batteries and the new technology and control algorithms and everything that's being put into here, like these are legitimate resources that are starting to be incorporated to grid planning frameworks. And while it's not here today, it's not going to be here in 2025. But a couple years down the road, with a couple of reasonable decisions and actionable steps by utilities, like, we're going to plan for this. We want to put in the systems and the control software in place that we can actually push one button and dispatch all 91 of those Kia EVs in back into the grid and discharge. And all right, here's the space we have to work within. Don't discharge them below 30%. Leave some additional margin, make sure that they're still able to charge fully overnight so the consumer doesn't see it. It's not a lot of cost. It's not a lot of cost to push back an incentive.
Most people don't realize that this vehicle to grid stuff exists. And then you see these arguments in Congress where somebody will talk about how much energy the EVs need. And the truth is they're kind of assuming that you're charging from 0 to 80% every night. And it's generally, you're probably going to be adding no more than 20% of that 10 to 20% of that battery each night as a general rule. And vehicle to grid will really make it a lot easier to balance renewables around the system. That's 100%. For sure.
100%. I mean, because that's the issue we see today, where it's people say, well, it's what happens when the sun doesn't shine? What happens when the wind doesn't blow? Like this, you try to store it in a battery. Lots of logistics, lots of things to think about. Are there going to be days where, like, I have to opt out? I need to guarantee I have a full tank, or I have something to do tonight. My vehicle's running out. I need to charge at 4 o'clock, and I need to get 2 hours of charging before 6 o'clock when we go in. Absolutely. Are those things going to happen? Absolutely. And they'll be planning around that, looking at it from the big grid perspective. When we're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of these vehicles that are going to be out there on it, the averages start to play out, and you say, no, not everyone is going to need to do that. In fact, just about everybody is going to be able to say, you can take a little off the top of my battery. As long as it's fully charged in the morning, I don't care. And then you should have a utility perspective. And I've heard talks of some people even offering up, hey, in this program, like, if you sign up for it, charging's free that night. If you don't charge on certain days, if you don't charge between 4 and 7 o'clock and charge after 10 o'clock, like, it's free. Like, we're not going to, it's worth that much that we don't have to invest in a new power plant. We don't have to invest in new lines, whatever it is. Like, we'll just give it to you.
It would have been interesting if you'd also put that cost for nuclear per megawatt, and it probably would have been embarrassingly expensive. You
It
know,
would. It would, but it's
you
I mean,
know,
the key thing between the top and the bottom one is that no dispatch and no limit. And that's nuclear fits in there as well, where it's, the actual operating cost, the actual fuel cost is so much lower than these other areas over year over year.
right.
It just
Well,
runs.
the thing is, you talk about the no dispatch on the solar. I don't. I love renewables. Hydroelectric's probably the most consistent, of the renewables, but we don't really have that on a massive scale in this country like some countries around the world do. But at some point, whether it's we wait for nuclear fission, I see it harder to completely replace LNG and coal. Even if you had 80% renewables, you're still going to have 20% coal or LNG until, nuclear fission or something like that comes along and is affordable enough, the affordability versus safety, so that you can cover that. We already know we can build a super safe nuclear power plant, but at what cost?
Yep.
You know,
And that's the rub with all of it. It's cost versus reliability versus accessibility in all of these spaces. It was a huge pushback by, I would say, utilities and people grid experts. So 10, 15 years ago, the Obama administration, came out, we're going to shut down every coal plant within 5 years. And we all went, no, you're not. It's the grid's going to collapse. Yeah, we're all for integrating renewables, putting these things out here, but there's just this hard reality of those things are workhorses. Now you can see over time, over the past decade, they have absolutely been shutting down. Our reliance on coal, our usage of coal has just fallen off a cliff comparatively to where it was. But it's just like what you were saying. You have to have some of that. You have to be able, when I say go, when I hit the button and I need power generation, it has to work. And you just don't have that today with solar and wind. But that's where batteries come in. Can we store that energy? Can we keep access? So when the grid operator says, holy crap, like this power plant just failed, a storm came through and took out this transmission line, and now power has to be rerouted from here. All right, you over there, power plant, I need you to start up right now at full capacity, and you need to be up and running in 5 minutes. Solar can't do that. Wind can't do that. It just doesn't work that way.
So currently in our state, we are one of the cheapest states in the country for electricity. And there's a few other ones that are fairly similar, where we're down around 12 cents a kilowatt hour. But part of that is we're a small state and we have a lot of renewable generation. We have a dormant nuclear power plant, it's not being used, but we keep having all of these data centers open around the Omaha area because of our cheap electricity, the available of water to cool the computers. What kind of amount of increase in electricity are we seeing each year? Is that something that you ever see?
We could look and get the exact stats, but it's staggering. So I mean, 91 Kia EVs got 1 megawatt. A new data center, and as they expand and grow, I mean, 200 megawatts is not a crazy number. So whatever 200 times 91 is, I mean, that's pushing 20,000.
18,000.
Yeah. New EVs for the equivalent of one of those, and those run.
I'm sorry, 18,000 or 1,800, not 18,000, 1,800. I misplaced my zero.
But those things are running 24/7 at that high demand, whereas these are just individual. I mean, it's cyclical. It pops up for an hour or two. Those things are going through the roof. We just had an announcement last week, or maybe even earlier this week, across the river over in Council Bluffs, Google is adding $1 billion of investment right in this same corridor, where there's already Google facilities over there. We have Google on this side of the river. We have Facebook on this side of the river. We've got a really old Yahoo one. It's not even called Yahoo anymore. I think it's called Oath. Might be their parent company now. But this has been a hot and heavy corridor for it.
Well, then they should incentivize everybody, their employees, to all get Chevy Silverados, that 205 kilowatt hour battery, and then um, you know, charge up there and help with energy storage for for Google.
We saw a lot with crypto around here too a few years ago. It was very popular because power is cheap, and I mean that's once you buy your equipment, that's your only operating cost is power. So pack it up in a U-Haul and go locate somewhere else where power is cheap.
All right. Well, anyways, Mike, was that the end of the presentation?
Yeah, that's all I got.
That was great. I loved it. I hope people watching enjoyed this today. This was really good information. It was a change from our usual news reporting. This is Mike's sweet spot of what he does every day. So, it's interesting because, like I said before, I get people that try to act like, you don't know what you're talking about on some of the stuff. And it's like, well, you're obviously not listening or paying attention or something. So anyway, it gets kind of funny. Anyways, folks, thanks for watching today. I hope everybody enjoyed this comment or this content, and Mike will be back with us next Wednesday. Otherwise, I'll be back with Bill tomorrow. All right. See y'all later.